Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm the director of the Wainwright Prize. I can't quite believe it's 12 months since we last gathered like this, but here we are. Here we are again, today shining a light on the emergence of yet another new generation of outstandingly talented writers in nature and conservation publishing. The Wainwright Prize feels ever more important. Nature writing is still a boom business. People of all ages want to read about our connection with the natural world and reflect upon what we can do to protect it. Perhaps the raison d'etre of the prize today is to inspire younger generations to become better environmental stewards than those that preceded them. Please join this cause and the celebration online at wainwrightprize.com. Tag us using the hashtags on screen and on all the material around here. Check out all the official awards information on the website. As the genre gathers momentum, the prize has grown commensurately. We now have 3 categories encompassing a collection of 21 shortlisted authors and 3 independent and expert judging panels. My role tonight here, firstly, is to congratulate the authors of the former and to give enormous thanks to the efforts of the latter. Most of the authors and many of the judges are here tonight now and will join us on stage throughout the evening. So please can I ask you to put your hands together to say thank you to all those people. Thanks. So I said in my introduction I'm the director, but actually I don't do anything. I just turn up for this prize ceremony and turn up for the wine now. We created this prize 11 years ago as a tribute to the legacy of the local author Alfred Wainwright, the walker and writer of the famous Lakeland Fell Guides. In those early days of the prize, I seemed to do pretty much everything, including pouring the hastily purchased warm wine in Stanford's basement, if anyone remembers that, 11 years ago, and hanging around to wash up and pack up afterwards. It was all me. Nowadays, it's a complex campaign of action and support and a much sought after and high-profile award. Consequently, there are a number of people behind the scenes to thank. The team at project management agency Agile, headed up by Luke Giles, now mastermind everything. Madeline Knowles has thoughtfully managed the judging process over the summer. Daniel Bowers and her team sensitively deal with all the publishers and retailers to ensure that we provide a platform for extra sales of all these books all over the country. Rob Garraway and his design team created all the official Wainwright displays and digital assets online. He also commissioned again he commissioned our official featured artist of the year, the creator this year of all the imagery you see around you, and the framed trophies we're going to present to 3 authors later this evening, is the happily synergistically named Emily Wainwright. And she's here too tonight, so please do pass on all your congratulations to her, because I think the artwork is all beautiful this year. Credit also to the team at EDPR for their wonderful work creating publicity for the prize and the authors in the media. My thanks to them all. At this point, I ordinarily point out that we could not put this whole thing together without the support of a headline sponsor. Well, in fact, we can, and we have this year, because we've had to. But the prize hasn't enjoyed an association with a sponsor for the last 3 years, but no longer, and we now face more financially challenging times. We hope to unearth a new investing partner for next year to maintain the profile of what we think is a really, really important prize and must remain in the literary firmament. In promotional terms, we have built fantastic relationships with the most appropriate national organisations we can think of. The Wildlife Trusts, whose wonderful venue we're here today at, National Trust, RSPB, and of course, the Wainwright Society. We're extremely thankful for all their support. Of course, there's been a couple of constants over the last 11 years. The prize was originally a concept proffered to me by Francis Lincoln Publishers. And Richard Green and Denise Bates from the parent Quarto Publishing Group are here still supporting and part providing the cash prize of £2,500 to each winner. That financial support is matched by the estate of Alfred Wainwright, who have also endorsed and championed this prize from the beginning. His stepdaughters, Jane King and Annie Seller, are passionate about continuing his legacy to inspire readers of all ages to experience the outdoors. It is true to say that we couldn't do it without their support. We have 3 sessions to cover tonight. There are 3 prizes, and we aim to end hopefully around 8:15, 8:30. The first is aimed at the younger readers, and it's a prize that most inspires Jane. So I'd like to ask her to come up and kick off the awards and say a few words as an introduction to the Children's Publishing Prize session. Please join me in welcoming Jane King.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. Yes, I am particularly interested in the Children's Prize, but that's because my grandson is very keen on books. So it's lovely to be here and difficult to believe it's 11 years since that first year of the prize. Over that time, there have been many wonderful books, and it's been good to see the growth of books on conservation and climate change. And relatively recently, the Children's Prize, which seems to be increasing with even greater number of books for slightly older children. I know this has an effect because the aforementioned 5-year-old grandson gave me a lecture the other day on polar bears and melting ice, and what was I going to do about it. So the prize... Is that okay? Can you hear me? The prize, as Alistair said, is named after my late stepfather, Alfred Wainwright, commonly known as A.W., who wrote the iconic Guides to the Lakes, 7 volumes with every step explored. He produced camera-ready copy, which a designer recently pointed out to me was something like the first desktop publishing. They're meticulously drawn and illustrated with huge attention to detail. And he was so concerned with what they looked like and his ownership of them that he threw away over the first 100 pages, because when he'd written them, he thought it should be justified copy. The unjustified writing didn't look quite right. So he started again. They're effectively a love letter to his beloved Lakeland. And in fact, he wrote them in large part because he said when he couldn't walk anymore, he wanted to be able to look at these pictures and read the walks and bring them back to memory. Unfortunately, by the time he couldn't walk anymore, he couldn't see really much more either. So although he couldn't look at them himself, they were firmly etched in his memory and in his mind's eye. Today, they're published by Francis Lincoln and still very much in use, with 2 relatively recent new editions which contain updates on some of the practical things like walls that have fallen down or styles that have been added that are of particular use to people walking. When growing up in the lakes, which I did, Wainwright was a sort of mythical figure. We didn't know he was actually the borough treasurer or what he looked like. But every year or 2, there'd be great excitement because a new Wainwright volume was coming out. It was about 13 years or so for the whole 7 volumes. And it was at that stage I had no idea he would become my stepfather, but the guides were an introduction to parts of the lakes that I had never seen, areas I'd never explored, to me and to many, many others. This was a whole new world. And that's what a good book should and can be, I think. And that is what so many good books are, and that is what all these wonderful shortlisted books today. They have excited us, informed us, educated us, interested us, and opened our eyes to new and unexplored places. Sometimes we've explored these physically, sometimes it's just been metaphorically, but whatever it is, these authors here today have opened our eyes and helped us to see anew. So we owe them Our very grateful thanks. Thank you, all of you.
Hello, hello. My name is Roisin. I am the co-director, or one of the co-directors for UK Youth for Nature, which is the UK's leading youth network calling on the government to take action for climate change. But I am also the granddaughter of a man who has walked every single hill and mountain in the Wainwrights and who is exceptionally proud of me just to be here because the Wainwright books mean an enormous amount to him. So very, very excited to be here to host this panel, but also to have been the judge, a judge on the Children's Book Prize and the chair for the panel. So without further ado, because you don't want to hear too much from me, can I invite my panellists up? So we've got Nicola, Jackie, I think Catherine's on her way, and Kieran as well. And you can all take your seats.
I think you're clapping us to be able to balance on these, aren't you?
No.
I haven't balanced yet.
This is going to be a test to all of our core strength, I think. Okay, welcome, ladies, for starters. I do believe Catherine is going to be joining us, but she is unfortunately lost somewhere. So if I suddenly go, Catherine, welcome, that's what that's about, just to give you a bit of a heads up. Ladies, welcome to the first of the panels, Creating Fantastical Worlds. So may I welcome Nicola Davies, who is the author of Scrimsley, one of our shortlisted books, as well as Jackie Morris, who is the illustrator for Scrimsley, but also for the long-listed Panda's Child as well. And then we've also got Kieran Millwood Hargrave, who is the author of Shadow of the Wolf Queen. Now, we've got 15 minutes, so that is a very quick time to turn this around in. So we might only make it through one question, but we're going to give it our best shot. So, Nicola, I'm going to come to you first, so be prepped with this.
I'm ready. I'm poised.
Could you introduce your shortlisted books, all of which create incredibly compelling imaginative worlds? And talk a little bit about why you chose to build a fantastical kind of fictional world as a way of connecting children to nature.
Okay, well, I'll start with the end of that question first. I've written a lot of children's non-fiction about the natural world. And my background is as a zoologist. That's how I started my career. And what inventing a fictional world allowed me to do was to say things that were much more direct and much more political than I was allowed to say in my non-fiction. For instance, I wrote a non-fiction book that was actually shortlisted 3 years ago. And in its American edition, nearly all the teeth of that book, which had a very strong environmental message, were threatened to be taken out by the American editor. And that's the point at which I thought, okay, gloves off now. And I did get the messages in that book reinstated. But that really fueled my desire to write something that really shone a light on the dark forces of capitalism and colonialism and the reasons behind habitat destruction and the environmental pickle in which we find ourselves. And so I invented a world where everything was the other way round. Instead of being a world where we had developed our society and our culture and our industry using fossil fuels, and we're now trying to turn that back, I invented a situation where fossil fuels had never happened, where all the development, industrialization such as it was, had been done with renewables, and we had never lost our connection with the natural world. We still had the connection with the natural world that many indigenous people have, because in my invented world, it was possible to communicate with the minds of animals. And when you have those voices in your head, you can't ignore that green and what it desires and what it wants and what it needs. And into that world come the baddies who want to start using fossil fuels. And why do they want to start using fossil fuels? Because it gives them control. over access to energy. So that's the kind of political setup of these books. And into that first world stepped a tiger who I didn't plan, Scrimsley, who is, he's a tiger, but he also has a very human connection. He can use language, and he's a very mixed and conflicted being. And in this book, which explores his backstory and also explores themes of colonialism and colonial exploitation, it's also about identity, about what makes us who we are. And those are themes that many young people, many of us have struggled with. And it explores themes about what creates a life. Is life created by happiness, or is life created by purpose? So that's what this book is about.
That is a beautiful description and insight into a truly wonderful book. I wonder, Jackie, whether you might want to give us a bit of an insight into your illustration and artwork for this, and how you come to explore nature through your artwork.
It was a great privilege to be asked to do the cover for this book. Not only have I known Nick for a long time, but she's an incredibly good friend. I'm not sure I understand this idea of it being a fantasy, though, because what I love about reading is how you can take those 26 letters of the alphabet and they build all these worlds inside your mind, and they're real. It's not fantasy. I love that. So trying to find a physical look for Scrimsley and make a cover that stands out on a shelf was a challenge, which I hope I did meet.
Yes.
I love making a book that looks back at you, because booksellers find it really hard to put them spine out then if it's got eyes on. It's a really primitive human thing, but we don't like covering up eyes. So anytime I can, that's what I do. But yeah, and I was very privileged in that the prequel to this book was read to me by Nicola episodically around my kitchen table while I fed her food. It was just so then to be able to be a part of it, it's an honour, really. Yeah.
It comes through in the exquisite artwork. It really is something to behold. That the tiger's eyes are a really lasting impression. So, Kieran, do you want to talk us through your creation and your world and the world building, and how that connects to the idea of saving nature through A Shadow of the Wolf Queen?
I wish I'd written Impossible Creatures, but I did not, alas. So In the Shadow of the Wolf Queen is the first book in a trilogy, and I've been wanting to write a trilogy since I started wanting to write at all, but I knew it needed to be a story that needed 3 books. I didn't want to write, that dreaded middle book where I'm just trying to get to the 3rd book so that I can sort of write incredible action sequences and so on. And the initial seed for the idea actually arrived when I was walking in a rainforest in North Wales. Did not know there were rainforests in North Wales until I was in one, though of course there was a beautiful book about rainforests last year on the Wainwright shortlist. So I was walking this incredible landscape, and I knew that it was going to be the perfect setting for a book, but that the rest of that setting, pesky stories need characters, and the characters didn't show up until much later, about 8 years later. So I went back to the rainforest, and I sat under a tree, just like my main character Isolde starts the story. And I tried to listen, because by then I had seen Merlin Sheldrake's wonderful footage of him listening to trees speaking to each other through mycelium, and we know that this communication is happening all the time. And I knew I wanted my trilogy to feel like something that could have happened. So I prefer to think of it as a possible history. All the magic in it is nature-led, so it's all possible magic. It's magic that has happened, could happen, or is happening, whether that's through climate change or through extreme, permafrosts, things like that. So everything in this book, I must admit I take more and more liberties as the trilogy goes on, but everything in this book is possible. And it wasn't a limitation at all to explore. This first book is all based around trees, and the second book is based around rock and mountains. Third book's around fungi, mushrooms. So I was building towards something that felt less tangible, but trees are such an extraordinary connection and rooting into our stories as human beings. The entirety of our isles were once covered in forests, and everywhere there are the ghosts of that and how they affected where we built our towns and so on. So if you turn to sort of the inside page, you'll see that it's very familiar, my Fantastical map. But what I wanted to do was take everything back to the root. So all the names, for example, Ireland is Ulaid, which was the name that the first people who lived there gave it. So I really wanted to decolonialize the soil, take us right back to this possible history that maybe I kind of believe did happen before sort of an ice age 1,000 years ago.
There is a beautiful connection there between the two books about not wanting it to be fantasy, but about it being a possible future, which I think is really lovely.
Extrapolating from reality, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
Totally, in a really wonderful, creative way. Can I just check if Catherine's in the room? Because I really don't want to leave her out, but I don't think she is. She's still lost, which is concerning.
Should we talk about her while she's not here?
I can absolutely do that. Specialist mastermind subject, Catherine Rundle.
I really love that enthusiasm. Can I just fit in one last question? Because I'd really like to, I think one of the wonderful things about this particular prize and focusing on children is thinking about what they can take away from it. So from both books, and I'll come back to you, Nicola, for this first answer, what message are you actually hoping for children to take away? What's the kind of top line that you're wanting kids to take away from it?
Empowerment, taking power in their own lives, power to have adventures. I'm very keen on adventures, and I'm very keen on kids having adventurous lives and exploring. Adventure, power, voice, and the power of story, and the importance of the stories that we tell ourselves. There's a wonderful thing in the last few episodes of the Game of Thrones, for those of you who've waded your way through the entire, however many series it was, where one of the characters says, you can change the world with a good story. And that's absolutely true. I had a climate scientist on the radio the other day talking about the importance of the facts and having the facts as ammunition. But actually the thing that changes people's hearts is the story. And that power of story is absolutely key to what I believe and what I put into this book.
And as a creative campaigner, I know the power of art to really change minds. So, Jackie, kind of taking on that question, what do you want children to take away from your art? Is it around inspiration? Is it looking at eyes? What are you looking for when they're designing these pieces?
I work very much for people, not for children. Certainly with other books that I've done, I've tried to put books into the hands of children that they can use as tools to educate their parents, because I think that is there's a whole generation of people who didn't have the luxury of learning the names of things, and I think children have so much to teach us, and we should shut up and listen. You can see that by the movement in young people like Greta Thunberg, who's kind of disappeared a bit in the news, but it's helping children to educate our generation, who need to take more responsibility for every action that we do. I hope with every piece of work that I do that my work is a catalyst for other people's creativity, and that's kind of what I aim for, really.
Beautiful answer. And Kieran, what about you? What's your takeaway for children from this book and from your work?
I have no control over them, and they will take what they want. But if I had control, I would say this book is about connection. It's about reconnecting with the world around us, whether it's the weeds that grow through the pavement or the tree that grows in the centre of the city. It's that it's there and it's ours and we are its, and we are all part of each other. And I would also say that, my book it is not okay. You know, things are not okay. But that is okay, because the only thing I believe in more than humans' capability for destruction is humans' capability for creativity. And I really, truly believe that not only children are the future, but we adults are the future. I think there are people who are coming up with solutions as we speak. And I am incredibly hopeful for that reason.
Oh, that was a good ending. Thank you very much. That has been fantastic. I'm sorry that Catherine is lost in the wilds, in the fantasy wilds, but hopefully she will be able to participate. I'm now going to ask my wonderful participants to head back to their seats and say thank you very much. A round of applause for everyone. Thank you. And I'm going to invite Dan Green to the stage. Dan, do you want to head up for the next panel? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. That was an absolutely fascinating panel. My name's Dan Green, and I am the editor of a magazine for children, which is called The Week Junior, Science and Nature. And it's the monthly version of the Week Junior. And Jackie, that was an amazing answer, because that's really what we spend a lot of our time doing, is trying to help kids understand the planet so that they can help protect it in the future, but also educate the older generation. I really thought that was a really important answer. It was my joy and pleasure to basically be invited to judge the Wainwright Prize, the children's shortlist. The long list was amazing. The shortlist was up there. So, you know, congratulations to everybody who is here tonight. I would like to invite my panelists to the stage. We have Andrew Dawkin, who's the co-author of Global. Let's have a round of applause for Andrew. Andrew Donkin, apologies. Angela Harding, author of Wilding, illustrator of Wilding. It's going well. And also Katja Balin, who is the author of Foxlight. Yeah, so this panel, well done everyone, congratulations for making it to the shortlist. It was, it's been a brilliant experience.
A happy surprise.
This panel is titled Finding Hope in Nature. I'm going to start with Andrew, because you're next to me. Global was the only graphic novel that was on the shortlist. I'd love to find out a little bit more about how the genesis of it, how you start creating that, how you get it together, and also how Global explores these themes of hope and knowledge.
Sure. I'm told, happily, that Global was the first graphic novel to be longlisted or shortlisted for the Wainwright Prize ever. So we're kind of we're very happy about that, and it's a sign, I think, of how popular graphic novels are. That one's made it as far as the long list and indeed the short list. Global came out of our last book. We did a graphic novel called Illegal that looked at it was a sympathetic look at migration across the Mediterranean. And after we'd finished that, our publishers were kind enough to say, right, what's next? What have you got next? And we thought the one issue in the world that was bigger than kind of international migration was, of course, the climate crisis. And we wanted to look at that. And in particular, Global takes a look at its impact on children. So Global is a story about two kids, Yuki, who lives in the Arctic, and Sammy, who lives on the Bay of Bengal. So two very different places, and the chapters alternate between the two of them, and they do kind of come together at the end. And everything in the book is true. Every element of global warming that's in the book has already happened. We didn't want to write a story where it was saying, in 500 years, everyone will be living underwater, because that was terrible when Kevin Costner did that. So we thought that we would keep everything strictly factual. So everything in here, every effect of global warming has already happened. It's not stuff that's about to happen. It's all happened. And we wanted to say to kids two things, really. We wanted to say this stuff is happening now to other children, because it's very easy if you live in a nice, comfortable house in England or the middle of America to imagine global warming in the future. But actually, this stuff is happening now to children around the world. And the other thing we wanted to do, and one of the early panelists referred to this, was give children something to hit their parents around the head with, so that they could get involved. And one thing we wanted to do was to humanise the dangers of climate change. So you can read all the numbers you want, and 1.7, 1.5, 2.5, but to show characters that you hopefully care about and kids that you like and are engaged with in a kind of adventure story, but where the villain is climate change. That was our aim, and our takeaway would be hit your parents with it, think about other people.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see how that sells. I would definitely be writing that in my reviews in the Week Junior Science and Nature. Hit your parents with this book, and they'll go.
Especially the hardcover.
Well, in Wilding, it seems to me that hope and knowledge is kind of really closely intertwined. So I'm wondering, whether these two ideas always work together in children's literature about the environment, and how you bring that out with your illustration work.
Well, I think I'd firstly like to reiterate the words of Jackie Morris, in that I see this as a book for people, not just for children. And I would call it a family book, because I've watched my husband's mother, my stepmother, who's got dementia, completely engrossed in this book, and as also my grandchildren. And also, these are not my words, these are the words of Isabella Tree, and I have learnt so much being involved in this project. This, as an illustrator, is a very unusual project, because I got to go and stay with her through the year that I made the book. We often, as I'm sure Jackie will know, we don't get that connection to actually being in the place. But if I was lucky to be invited into this world, I hope that people that look through the book see that it's not only a factual book, but it's an emotional response to being in that place. I have a lot of trouble with the word nature, which is odd for being at this nature prize, because what the fuck is nature? We impose so much on it, and it's like, it makes me quite cross, as you can tell. But actually going to NEP and seeing what could be restored and regenerated within such a short space of time, within 20 years is nothing, was amazing. So I went with great skepticism and thinking, is this place going to be a zoo? But no, it's connected, and we use this word hope, and we're just sort of clutching at that, aren't we? As we flounder under what you're talking about, the corporate world that is so huge and demanding. But what else can we do? I'm just a lino cutter. That's all I do.
Well, I mean, the illustrations are absolutely beautiful, and I hadn't appreciated that you'd spent all that time at NEP.
Yeah, I went for a year. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about the book and about how the scope of it and the project?
Well, I did say I think Isabella Tree, it's her words, and she is a most inspiring woman. I'm looking at Jackie again, because as illustrators, we don't often get to meet the people that we illustrate for, and sometimes they don't quite turn out to be the people we think they might be. But Isabella Tree is just an inspiring character and has done so much for the world. And I can't speak more highly of her and feel more honoured to be her illustrator for this project. But one of the things that I feel I really did learn was I thought I knew a bit about the natural world, but I learnt so much. And I said to her, I think another title for this book could be Beavers Don't Eat Fish. Because I actually thought they did eat fish, to my shame. To my shame, I know, and I thought I knew a bit. But if you go to the place where they've got beavers, and they create lawns, and they make these beautiful environments, and they're farmers. Beavers as farmers, who'd have thought it?
Love that idea. Yes. And I think actually, it wouldn't be too much to divulge, but all the people on the judging panel felt we learnt a lot by reading it. knowledge. That's great. Katja, Foxlight is really all about knowledge. It's all about coming from a place of not knowing much, and it's adventure. Yeah, could you tell me, tell everybody a little bit more about the shortlisted book, and also explain where hope comes in?
So Foxlight is a story about twin girls called Fen and Ray, and they live in what's called the Lighthouse, which is basically a home for children who have been left by their parents. And this house is on the edge of these kind of desolate wildlands that the children never venture into. Fen and Ray are different from all of the other children in one way, well, two ways. One, they have each other, but something they don't have is their own story. They were found at Foxlight, this moment when the kind of dawn and the dusk, twilight are kind of meeting and the world is waking up, but it's not quite daylight yet. And they were found curled up with the foxes. Every other child has their story. They know why they were left, and they know why they had to be left. And Fen and Ray don't have that, and they are desperate for that missing piece. So one day they see a fox for the first time ever. This wildland is, like I said, it's desolate. There's nothing out there. They see this fox and they decide to follow it to see if they can find their story, to see if they can find their mother. And on this journey, they discover so much truth and beauty and danger in this wild world that has just been essentially left to die, left to fall apart. And the hope that I think they find there, and that I would want children and anyone reading this book to find, is that you tell the story. The story is yours now. So the story of what happens with our future, what happens with nature, what happens with our lives, that is in our hands. Looking at the past, I think, can often be frustrating and fruitless, and wishing things were different. But what I hope children will take away is that they can find meaning in what they do and what they can do for the future generations.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think a theme that unites all three books represented here is just the sheer honesty with which you speak, and the way you speak. You know, you don't speak to children, you don't talk down to children, you speak to them as people. I've just got one final question, really, which I'm going to put to everybody, which is, you know, how do we learn to talk honestly about climate change and the challenges that face us, and, you know, how do we encourage more engagement and interest in the natural world?
I think that the kids are naturally interested in the natural world, so I think it's relatively easy to get them interested in it. It's something that my kids, they're teenagers now, so they're not interested in very much apart from sleeping. But when they were interested in other things going out, they were very interested in all elements of the natural world. That's slightly unfair to teenagers. I apologise unreservedly before I'm cancelled. There we go. Okay, so any teenagers here? Teenagers love nature, kids love nature, adults do. We become slightly separated from it as adults because we go on tubes and we go into the office every day, and it becomes something we might do for 2 hours at the weekend. But kids are still kind of running around parks and you know, playing football and doing all that kind of stuff. So kids, I think, are naturally interested in nature. I think it's really difficult to police some of the thinking about kind of climate change, by which I mean you want people to be... Oh, I'm so sorry. That was me. You want people to be conscious of it and thinking of it, but you don't want people to over-internalise guilt to do with it. You know, when you are making a huge effort to do something, but big multinational corporations are refusing to do very much at all. So I think everybody needs a balanced approach to, you know, that, and campaign on things that make big differences, like with the big companies and things, rather than getting kids to worry and internalise about everything that they do is going to end the world. They need to be given the tools to be able to use a parliamentary system and use letter writing and use campaigning to be effective to make real change like that, I think.
Sorry. I'd like to bring it back to a real. I was just thinking of the words, and what came into my mind was I'm lucky enough to have 2 grandchildren now, and actually one of my grandchildren is neurodiverse. He's autistic, and the one thing that comforts him is lying in a hammock watching leaves and the patterns in leaves. And my other grandson, equally, the freedom to run in green, that's what we need, and that's what we need to endorse.
I think that it's really important we don't take hope away from children. I think that so much of the news cycle would sort of almost let children know the world is doomed and that's that. And I think that is a terrifying prospect. And I also don't think it's true. And I'm not saying that we should put all of this on the shoulders of the younger generation. That's not fair. But I don't think I'm that old. And I'm so young. But, you know, all right, stop laughing. I don't remember recycling being a huge thing when I was 10. You know, it was sort of like a couple of people would say, oh, you should recycle that. But actually, I think the vast majority of us in our, 15, 20 years ago were not recycling like we are now. All of these tiny little things that we all do as instinct, those children are growing up with them. And they will grow up with more and more ways, these tiny incremental steps, which mean that we can and they can make a difference. And I honestly believe that will have a profound, I hope that will have a profound impact on the way these multinational corporations run themselves and, when they will achieve things like carbon neutrality. So there is hope, and I think we have to tell children that and give them that rather than this sort of message that everything is ruined and could you guys maybe think of a way of sorting that? Thanks, bye. Like, it's a collective responsibility, but it is within their very bones now, and I think that's hopeful.
Hear, hear. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for those words and your thoughts and for your amazing books as well. Everybody give them one last round of applause. So it just remains for me to ask Roisin to come back on the stage, and this is the moment you've all been waiting for.
Now, Dan, don't leave because the prizes are down here, so I need you to hand out. Thank you very much. That was fab. Such a message of hope, which is something we're all looking for, frankly. This is the second year that I've been involved with the judging process for the Children's Prize. And I found it really hard because I just really love children's literature, for a start. But from the very moment we got the long list and the books came flooding through the door, I knew it was going to be a really hard judging process for me. And I think a lot of the other judges on the panel who I just want to give a big shout out to, because many of them are here today, it was hard. We all came to a fantastic consensus in the end, which is wonderful as the chair of this particular panel. But it was hard because there's so many wonderful books here, as illustrated by the two panels just there. I'd also like to mention those books that have not been represented on the panels. Firstly, I'd just like to give a shout out to Impossible Creatures because Catherine wasn't able to articulate that herself. But that really is a book of whimsy and vibrancy and colour in kind of coached in a fantasy world that gives people hope, I think, and I can highly recommend that. Alongside Fly by David Lindo, that is illustrated by Sarah Boccaccini Meadows, which is an exquisite book in the same way that Wilding is an exquisite book, and really one for all of the family, for parents to sit down and read with their children. And then The Observologist by Giselle Clarkson, which is also truly wonderful. You're getting a theme, there's a sensing a theme coming. But that's really a sort of a look at how you can engage your children from a very young age in just seeing the frankly unremarkable things that are quite remarkable in nature. And as a nature campaigner, I'm all about that. So just wanted to give a shout out to those. Now, as indicated by the variety of genres and styles, and even audiences from those two panels, the shortlist had something for everyone. It really has something for the curious, for the adventurous, and for the great imaginations amongst children, which, as I said, made this judging process a bit of a challenge. So that takes us to the big news, which is actually we couldn't decide, so we've got 2 awards to hand out, which is very exciting. So we did this last year, not for the Children's Prize, but we've actually come up with the winner for the Children's Prize as well as a highly commended award. that might be indecision, but it's also just that all the books were wonderful. So the first one that we're going to announce, and I'd like to have a big round of applause for the winner, is the book that was awarded with a highly commended title. And this was a book that the judges all absolutely adored, whose message of shared stories across seemingly enormous distances taught us all about the power of hope and adventure and bravery, most importantly. And the winner of the highly commended prize is Global by Owen Colfer and Andrew Donkin, illustrated by Giovanni Vigiano. Thank you. And just a quick note from the judges that we really did love to see a graphic novel on the long list and the short list this year. So more of that, please, if there are any budding graphic novelists out there. But that takes us to the final, which is our winner for the Children's Prize this year, which is a book that frankly enchanted every one of the judges. It is a warmly told story that dances from the start, and it shares a tale of sisterhood in an unruly natural world and the depths that we go to find connection. And so the winner is Foxlight by Katja Balin. Want to come on up? Here you go. Ooh. Stop clapping.
I honestly was not expecting that, bloody hell. I used up all of my eloquence, sort of, up there. But thank you very much. This is genuinely an honour. This is like the best prize ever for me to win, because I don't know if you've noticed, I really love writing about nature, and this is just the boost that I need. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Yay!
You're very welcome. Huge congratulations to Katja there. So it leaves me to just invite Craig Bennett up to start the kick-off for the Conservation Prize.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheen. Okay, well, welcome. I'm Craig Bennett. I'm Chief Executive of the Wildlife Trusts, and it's been my absolute pleasure to have been a judge on the Wainwright Prize the last few years, and this year on the conservation category. As I am Chief Executive of the Wildlife Trust, I should probably officially welcome you to London Wildlife Trust, the beautiful Camley Street. And if you're after a little bit of hope at this point in the evening, then all you need to know is that this site, about 60 years ago, was where they dropped a lot of the coal from big hoppers down into the steam engines that used to come and fill up here. And of course, in the 1980s, it was no longer used for that, and it was threatened with being turned into a truck yard, basically, a lorry park. And London Wildlife Trust sort of emerged with the local community at the time to fight that and to say, actually, this could and should be a really important place for nature. And of course, that's what it's become. It's become this wonderful Camley Street Natural Park. But you might see that this beautiful building that was built during the pandemic, just to make it even more interesting and simple for a build, obviously, actually reflects the history of the coal drops in those skylights there. But absolutely beautiful site. And you see it quite regularly on the news, because TV crews that can't be bothered to travel around the country for nature stories come here and pretend that they've gone really far. But anyway, that's another point. Anyway, so we've had another amazing year of the Conservation Prize. You know, there was an astonishing long list, I have to say, to start off with, and then it was really hard to get it down to the short list, and we've ended up with a fantastic shortlist this year. And in fact, the theme of the discussion we're going to have tonight is a growing genre of new voices, because I think what we've seen, even in the sort of 5 years that the conservation category has existed, is exactly that, you know, much more diversity coming through in the authors, it often being a category in which you see debut authors and really diverse voices coming through. So that's one of the issues we're going to explore in this panel tonight. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome up 5 of the shortlisted authors tonight to the stage. We have Sophie Yeoh, who wrote Nature's Ghost, Helen Chersky, Blue Machine, Chantal Lyons, Groundbreakers, Oliver Franklin, Wallace, Wasteland, and Toi Sui. Please take it's not just you, please take your seats. and actually while they're finding their seats and their books and so on, I do want to say the author who couldn't be here tonight is John Vaillant. He lives in Vancouver, so it's probably just as well for the climate that he's not here tonight. But he wrote an amazing book that I really urge you to look at called Fire Weather, which tells a real gripping and nail-biting story. Tells a story about the appalling fire that happened at Fort McMurray in northern Alberta, where basically a third of the city got destroyed by wildfire back in 2016. And the judges kind of did think it was a book that felt like, as you read it, it feels like a wildfire. The pace of it feels like a wildfire is ripping through the book. And it's an extraordinary explanation and exploration of the future we face because of climate change and so on. And I urge you to give it a good look. So John couldn't be here tonight, but he was the sixth of these shortlisted authors. So look, an amazing group, and we've got 5 of them here, which is absolutely fantastic. Sophie, I'm going to start with you, if I can. Your book, Nature's Ghost. I mean, a beautiful book, I have to say. We absolutely loved it. And, beautifully written. And, you should tell us what it explores very briefly.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the recurring themes from people who reviewed it is it explores a lot of things. They don't quite know how to summarise it often, but it's about environmental history and how that can inform nature conservation today. But I take quite a broad look at the, environmental history. I cover, millions of years, tens of millions of years in it. I jump around quite erratically in time, looking at, eras from the very, very deep past to just after the dinosaurs, to the Pleistocene, the Ice Ages, to the Holocene, when humans really started to have an impact, and into the future as well with climate change. And I kind of travel around. I went to Finland to report it, to look at the impact of humans there. So, yeah, it's quite a broad take on that, but always with the kind of unifying theme of what are we trying to restore? Do we need to be informed by the past? Can we recreate that? And to what extent should we try to recreate that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I loved about it is it was very much sort of urging us to be informed by the past, but not trapped by it, I thought, which I thought was very nice. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey into the writing process and why you wrote this book and, into the world of conservation as you do that? And what sort of inspired you to do this?
Yeah, I'd had a long interest in environmental history. I think one of the first things that really caught my imagination with this subject was reading the Middle English poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which has these amazing passages, sort of creative passages about the medieval landscape of Arthurian knights. And that was when I really started to think, well, what was the landscape like in the past, and how can that be used in a way that's inspirational today? But then I also came at it from a scientific perspective, and I think it was the quite unromantic subject of algal mats that got me thinking about it, with Captain Scott had collected these mats in the Antarctic, and that was helping to show how climate change is affecting the landscape there today. And I thought there was just this wonderful combination of science and, poetry and stories and history that really got me thinking it was a subject that I wanted to explore in depth, and particularly with conversations around rewilding today. There's that idea of going back to the past, and I think often an attempt to reject that by a lot of people who are interested in rewilding because of the impossibility of going back to the past. And so I wanted to capture a lot of the research that had been done to show, that it's a kind of balance, that you can't recreate it in its entirety, but you don't have to close your eyes to the past, that there's a ton of interesting and helpful information out there when it comes to conservation today.
Great, fantastic. Well, I think there's one of the things that I found amazing about your book is for someone like myself that's worked in the professional conservation sector for some time, it kept challenging me and causing me to think, and which I think is really good. I have been really recommending it to people to read it, people I work with. So I think there's a lot in it to challenge people and make people think. So, really, really great, and congratulations. Let's move on, if we can, to Helen Chersky. Helen, you, as well as writing Blue Machine, which we're talking about in a moment, you're also obviously a broadcaster, and you, with Tom Heap on BBC Radio 4 Rare Earth programme.
And we have interviewed both you and Ollie.
I know, it's quite funny that it was only a couple of months ago, in the run-up to the general election, that you were interviewing me. So now it's quite fun to interview you. You asked some hard questions as well. So...
Oh dear.
No, not at all. So, Helen, astonishing book, Blue Machine. Huge amounts of work gone into it. I do feel quite exhausted, kind of thinking about how much research must have gone into it. In your words, why don't you describe the book?
Yeah, just before I do that, I just want to say something else that occurred to me. So I'm an experimental physicist, and we have this word in the lab for when you hit something until it works, and that's percussive maintenance. And I realised tonight we have all learned about percussive environmentalism, which is when children hit their parents with books until they do something about the environment. And I think we should take this. We think we should start a thing here. Anyway, so yes, Blue Machine. Here it is. Here's the pretty the UK paper. The paperback cover. So my bee in my bonnet, which has been a bee that has existed for about 15 years, is that we talk about Earth being a blue planet, and we have done for 50 years, ever since the Apollo mission sent back those wonderful images, Earthrise and the blue marble, that showed Earth from space. And the thing is, if you look at Earth from space, it's blue. They called that photograph the blue marble for a reason. And then we had 50 years of everyone talking about being a blue planet, and nobody ever looked at the blue. It was rubbish. They looked at the things in it, the whales and the fish and the dolphins, which are very nice, and the pollution, which isn't, and the ships, which vary. But nobody ever talked about the water itself. And the thing is that as a physicist, when you look at what the ocean is really doing, that's where all the action is. That is the biggest story on Earth, because it's an engine, and it's turning and it's doing things in 3 dimensions. And the things it does affect our world and our civilization so profoundly that we don't even notice them. And I came across this frustration when I first accidentally rocked up in the ocean world as a physicist who knew nothing about the ocean. And I could see there was a thing, but no one could really tell me what it was. I could see there was a massive physics thing here, but no one had written the book, right? No one had written and I actually went round the Scripps Institution of Oceanography just before I left after my first year, asking people for books, and nobody recommended a book about the water itself. They recommended all kinds of other interesting books. So Blue Machine is my attempt to tell the story of the physical nature of the ocean engine. And the brilliant thing about the ocean is that in order to really understand it, it's a complex and rich place, and you need lots of different perspectives. There's that ancient story of the 3 blind men and the elephant, where 3 blind men somehow come across an elephant. We're never told how that happens. And one reaches out his hand and he touches a leg and he says, oh, an elephant is like a tree. And one reaches the hand and touches a trunk and says, oh, an elephant is like a snake. And they're all true. All these perspectives are true, but you kind of have to see all of them in order to make sense of the whole. And the ocean is like that. It's complex and rich. And of course, the wonderful thing you can do in a book is tell stories through lots of different lenses. And the hope is that by the time these stories have been told, and they're about bits of history and battles and the ways that animals live and the way that we live and all these things that the ocean has influenced, has been there dictating what happens. If you tell the stories through all those different lenses, suddenly the ocean becomes a thing. And so that's the aim of the book. It's so that people see this wonderful engine for what it really is. And when we think about being a blue planet, we actually see the blue as the best bit or the interesting bit, not just the sort of colouring in between the land. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. And I think what will always stick in my memory from reading it is that brilliant description you have of the different layers in the ocean and how they move around. And you talk about it being like a ream of paper if you put your thumb on it and spin it around a little bit. And that was just a very, for me, a very visible way of describing what's going on in the ocean. It really caused me to think very differently about how the ocean works. So, astonishing book, Helen, really. And just briefly, can you tell us, there are a lot of new writers coming in to this kind of category now. What's your sense about, the impact that's going to have on this genre and on the impact on readers as more and more writers and sort of a greater diversity of writers come into this genre? So I think this is my view on science, and I think this is true for a lot of non-fiction subjects, is that people think it's that when an expert talks, what they're telling is facts, but actually what they're giving is perspective. It's a way of looking at the world. And what I carry as a physicist and as an ocean scientist is a perspective, and I can share that perspective. And I think the thing that you get when you get different voices is all these different perspectives, and they are all simultaneously true, and you sort of have to hold all of them in your head. You know, it's the same idea. And so I think that the diversity of voices is really important, because it's giving people, like, different ideas resonate with different people. And so you need perspectives that are going to bring on people in different ways. And then we all sort of keep, no one can know everything, but we can all keep developing our thinking through these different perspectives. And it keeps it interesting. It never stops being interesting, because there's always a new perspective. There's always, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that's the moment, that's the killer moment. Oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that's what, when you have a robust, well-informed descriptions and stories that really make a penny drop, and what you want is a big jar to keep all those pennies in, and then you've got something useful. Then you've got a framework to think of, to do something in the world.
Absolutely right. Well, congratulations on Blue Machine. It's a lovely, lovely book. It really is. And again, I know I'm going to be recommending it to lots of people to read. It's just one of those. Let's move on next to Chantal Lyons. Chantal, your amazing book, Groundbreakers, which is all about the groundbreakers being wild boar, and particularly in the Forest of Dean, where you still live.
Not anymore. Not for now, but right. Soon, one day, hopefully.
Okay. But actually, not just that. You look into wild boar in certain other places as well, France and so on. And in this, you're really exploring the relationship between people and wild boar and so on. I mean, how did you get into this? I mean, there's a lovely moment where you talk about, I think it's probably in the acknowledgements, where you talk about, even as a child you were dreaming of becoming an author, and now you've done it, and the book is about wild boar. That's quite interesting. What kind of got you into that? What was your calling for this book?
For this book, wild boar, as I'm sure is the case for a lot of people, wild boar were not on my radar. I never thought about them. And why would we? They have been gone from this country for so long. And I really only started thinking about wild boar after I read George Monbiot's book, Feral. That was 2013. A year later, I was sort of, casting around for a topic for my master's dissertation in environmental social science. And at the time, there were headlines coming out of the Forest of Dean about all the trouble that the wild boar were causing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I could go there and talk to people there about what it's like to live with wild boar, because they are in a completely unique position of living with this animal again after it had been gone for about 700 years from this country. And so I went there in the summer of 2014. I thought, well, hopefully I'll get a good grade out of this. I didn't really expect more than that. But what I found there, I don't want to spoil it. You'll have to read the book. But what I found there blew my mind, completely upended my expectations. And I came away thinking, why isn't everyone talking about this? This is incredible what has happened here. The way that the wild boar have kindled or rekindled something that has been gone for so long from this country. And I went away. I did get a good grade, which is nice, but the dissertation got filed away in a drawer somewhere, as they usually do. And I kept thinking, well, someone surely is going to write about this soon. They're going to write about the return of wild boar to the UK, because wild boar had come back not just to the Forest of Dean, but a few other places like Kent and East Sussex, Devon, Dorset, also Scotland. But nothing ever happened. And years passed, and eventually 8 years later, in 2021, I sent a proposal to Bloomsbury. And they said, yes, write it. So at that point, I did move to the Forest of Dean for a bit, to immerse myself in the world of the wild boar, to speak to people who I had spoken to 7-8 years ago, which was brilliant, because it was almost like a longitudinal study where I could say to them, has anything changed? Or have your feelings about the boar changed? And so it was, that's how it started for me, because I felt that, after all these years, wild boar is still here, in some places dangling by a thread or snuffed out again, made extinct again. And I just thought they need more champions, like the way that the beaver has had this amazing PR campaign behind it in the last sort of decade or so. We need that for the wild boar too, and that's why I wanted to write the book.
Yeah, it's amazing. And during it, the point is, yes, you're talking about wild boar, but you're also very much talking about the people and the communities that are living with wild boar and interacting around it and so on. It's quite extraordinary story to do that. And in the process, I think was quite interesting. Is obviously there's a big debate in Britain about return of beavers, and people talk about wolves and pie martins and I like to dream bears even one day. You never know. That might be a bit tricky, but actually, essentially, we're kind of left thinking at the end of your book, if we can't do it for the wild boar, then we're really going to struggle with everything else, and we've got to kind of somehow make this work. But you're there with all the complexities on it. You're sharing those quite openly, and not sort of trying to suggest it's simple either, as well. Tell us just a little bit more your sense as well about this range of voices coming into this genre now. It really has been kind of clear to see that over the last few years. What's your sense as to what that's doing in the wider conservation debate?
Oh, I guess it's hard to say. I mean, in one way, I suppose I feel like I'm still kind of not a particularly new voice, and that I guess I am from a middle-class background. I'm not someone who has been, lived somewhere where they've been cut off from nature. I have had the wonderful luck to always have close access to nature, which is why I hugely support the Right to Roam movement, to make sure that everyone does have the access to nature that we all deserve, the access to nature that we need to help us reforge our connections with nature. So I think that's really the limit of my expertise on that topic. But I mean, going back to what you said about bringing in all these different voices with the book, I mean, another key thing about the book was that I feel like a lot of the conversations we've had about nature restoration haven't yet tackled full on the question of learning to live with the nature that isn't so easy to live with. It's very important to introduce, for example, butterflies and glowworms, but they are relatively easy for the average person to live with. But certain animals, such as the wild boar, are not. And we do have to accept that if we do want a thriving future for humans and all other animals, we're going to have to share our space, our mental and our physical space, more.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, again, another beautiful book. And one of the things I found really amazing about it is in your descriptions of sort of crawling around in the Forest of Dean, slipping around in the mud and so on. I really kind of, very evocative. You could imagine kind of being there in the undergrowth, watching these boar and listening to them as well. So it's an amazing book, and how it kind of really conveys that, and while exploring these issues. So, congratulations. It's a phenomenal one. I again heartily recommend it. Let's move on next to Oliver Franklin Wallace, I should say, Oliver Franklin Wallace, and your book Wasteland. Oliver, tell us about what Wasteland is. It's probably better for you to put in your words, and then I'll explain why it means a lot to me as well a little bit later.
Thank you for having me. Well, it's a funny one because I feel slightly out of place because I have all of these incredible writers around me writing about beautiful things in nature and wildlife and these amazing species and haunting landscapes, and I wrote a book that's largely about what's in your bin. And let me tell you, there is nothing that kills a party vibe more than when people say, "Oh, what are you writing about?" You say, "I'm writing a book about rubbish," and they go, But it's really important, trust me. I was reporting a story for The Guardian a few years ago about recycling and the fact that a lot of the stuff that we thought was being recycled now wasn't being recycled. Most people know that now, but at the time it was relatively new. And I remember talking to a guy who worked in the waste industry. I travelled around to a few of these businesses that are always kind of out of the way. They're hidden away on industrial estates with these special machines that make it smell like cotton sheets, so to kind of hide the fact of what's going on there. And he looked at me and said, one day everything you own will belong to me. And just one of those mind-blown moments where, and doesn't that like perfectly sum up rubbish, but also everything that we're talking about in terms of conservation and climate change and the climate crisis. And it kind of lingered with me for a long time afterwards. Because I do think, he's right, first of all, but there's something profound in it. There's something, and hopefully the book is kind of, first of all, a journey because I'm kind of obsessed with weird hidden worlds and where things go, but also kind of, it was about different way of looking at the world and a way of seeing the value in the things that we throw away and the people who end up having to clean up after us.
Well, I mean, it's astonishing writing. I mean, you're am I remembering you're head of features at GQ or something?
I am now, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, yeah, well, I can see that fits, because you've managed to take an issue which some people would find perhaps not that most exciting, although I've always found it very exciting, but that's another matter. In fact, I should declare that I once, a few years ago, the local recycling plant had an open day. And I said to my wife and my kids, I said, we've got to go, we're really exciting. And we went, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, he's been recycling pilled.
But it was also, my wife and I's our 10th wedding anniversary. So she's never quite forgiven me for that. But it was a great day, I thought. Anyway, so I've always found it actually very interesting. But what is amazing is you've written about these recycling plants and the whole story about waste and recycling and materials. It is a really interesting read, and I think not just for people who take their wife there on a 10th wedding anniversary, but I mean, it's all the judges kind of found it was just really fascinating to read this stuff that we hadn't necessarily thought was exciting. And in the process, you're going around the world in places as well. Go to India, and I mean that's a really shocking chapter when you describe just the scale of the huge tip in India.
Yeah, I think it's the opening chapter is set on Ghazipur landfill, which is outside New Delhi in India. To give you a sense of the scale, it really helps to have slides in these circumstances. But it's basically a mountain range made of garbage. It's about 96 meters tall. It covers about 2,000 football fields. You can see it from about 3 miles away, and it kind of hangs over the city. There's actually 3 of them. They kind of ring New Delhi, as many of these dumps actually ring a lot of kind of the big metropolises in the global south, because they experience massive consumption and population growth simultaneously before they really had a robust infrastructure to deal with their waste. And the reason, one of the many reasons I lived there, I went to stay there. And to write about the waste pickers who live on the mountain, as they call it, is, first of all, it's like a perfect example of all the things that we hide away. You put your bins out and it just kind of disappears. We have this magic trick that we've developed to hide it from us, and it's amazing to see it in person. But also, there are thousands of people who live on the mountain, on Ghazipur, who are waste pickers, of which there are more than 20 million people in the world, and their job is to literally pick through the waste and take what has value and sell it to recycling traders. And they have the most incredibly warm and generous people who live in some of the worst conditions you're ever going to see. But they have an incredible way of looking around the world because they know the value of everything. And you can give them a pile of plastic and they can touch it and feel it and literally be like, oh, this is polyethylene terephthalate, and say, oh, this is worth this amount. And it teaches you this amazing kind of view of the world that understands the value in everything and understands the work that's gone into it and where it's going to go afterwards. So they kind of became like a guiding light for the rest of the reporting of like, okay, well, how can I help all of us think a bit more like that, while also kind of showing the tremendous injustices that means people have to live like this every day.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And what's your sense? This range of issues. You start off by making the point that your book is obviously not so obviously and explicitly about nature as perhaps some of the others, but actually what you do see now is this genre of conservation writing in its broader sense sort of widening, encapsulating so many kind of wide issues now, which seems quite exciting to me. It's like it feels a bit less trapped in a particular pigeonhole or box that it could have otherwise been.
Can I say that that's all, I think, part, a legacy of this prize and the efforts of some of the people in this room to kind of really elevate and platform some of the great writers who I was introduced to by this prize and this little sticker in bookshop. So that's a real kind of moment for me to be here. But yeah, I think as more and more of us are kind of becoming terrified but also motivated by taking action on climate change, it's amazing to see more of an appetite both among readers but also among publishers to tell different kinds of stories. Thank you to Simon & Schuster for not running away when I said I want to write a book about rubbish, because lots of people did. So yeah, and my hope is that a lot of this book is not just about rubbish, but it's about the things that we influence on poorer people in the world. And it takes place in Ghana and it takes place in some in the indigenous Midwest in America, and it takes place in India, as we talked about, and some other places. And those voices are not heard, and they're not getting books published. So nice as it is as a journalist to be able to go in and tell some of those stories, I also hope that we can platform some more voices and get those writers to tell their own stories in future. And so, yeah, all the publishers listening,
Fabulous, fabulous, very good. Excellent. Well, Oliver, thank you very much. And another brilliant book that I'm recommending to people. Let's go on now to Toy Sue, and your amazing book, It's Not Just You. Again, Toy, I think it's better for you to describe it rather than me. What is that title? What does it refer to? It's Not Just You.
All the generous offers. Yeah, I kind of joke to people that the book's a bit of a catfish. First of all, it's not a how-to guide, and in the first chapter I literally say put the book down if you're looking for answers, because you're not going to get them. But the sort of ethos of It's Not Just You is really a play on 4 different meanings, and it says here it's about eco-anxiety and the climate crisis, which it is, but it's also more broadly about Eurocentric environmentalism and the need to deviate away from that if we're really to find some more radical solutions to the climate crisis. And It's Not Just You is a really gentle guide which sort of encourages people who may not be familiar with anything other than the Western discourse of environmentalism. And at its most basic level, it's a reminder that you are not alone in whatever adverse reactions you are having to the world that we're living in. But then it kind of tries to peel back that layer and it goes, okay, well, it's not just you. Which perspectives are being left out of the mainstream? Which perspectives are a reflection of, the solutions that we actually need to tackle the climate crisis? And then It's Not Just You goes, okay, well, it's actually the system in place, and what is the system? How does it kind of perpetuate an environmental crisis? And then it ties it all together again by really focusing on collective power and community. And I'll admit, when I first got the long list, I was like, what am I doing here? And then it's quite similar to what Oliver was saying about, hang on a second, okay, I'll just roll with it. I'll probably get axed after the long list. And then the short list came out and I was like, what? What am I doing here? And to be in amongst such incredible writers who I really respect all of your work, so thank you for all that you do. It's such an honour. But also I really want to just say that It's Not Just You is again this testament to the power of the collective. I don't consider this my book. Obviously it's got my name on the front, but it was the product of so many people's efforts, many of whom are activists from the global south whose narratives are routinely sidelined, whose knowledge systems are routinely undermined, whose activism is quite frankly life-threatening, yet their narratives are not represented in the mainstream, are not represented in the global climate movement and the way that we choose to report on things. So it's a collective book, and I don't necessarily like to call it mine. I like to call it our book, and it's almost like a love letter to the climate justice movement.
Lovely, fantastic. I think, Toy, for me, reading it, I think the big penny drop moment for me, the light bulb moment, whatever you want to call it, is how you kind of shifted my thinking around climate and eco-anxiety being something about the individual to something about the group and society as a whole. Can I just ask you to talk about that a little bit more? Because I think for me, and actually we talked about it as the other judges, that's kind of a really profound thought, actually.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that, I guess, is the goal of the book, is to change the way that people think about not only eco-anxiety, but how it is a representation of some of the pitfalls of Western environmentalism. One thing I'd like to clarify for those who don't know what eco-anxiety is, it's described as the mental, somatic, or physical distress in response to dangerous changes in the climate. And it is something that's emerged in the last decade or so, and we often attribute it to young climate activists who are chanting in the streets, and that is very much the case for a lot of people. But the way that it's been portrayed in the sort of wider environmental movement is this sort of personal issue and personal responsibility. You struggle with eco-anxiety, you're mentally disturbed as a result of the climate crisis, that's your problem to deal with, and that's, you have to find the solutions to it. And many of those solutions consist of taking a walk in nature or going to see a therapist, and all of these things which, don't get me wrong, I indulge in and they're really important, but I organise a lot in the transition away from fossil fuels. I work with an organisation called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I'm also working on a climate litigation case against the Rosebank oil field in the North Sea. And I find it frustrating when the onus is put on us as individuals, because the reality is I wouldn't have eco-anxiety if the fossil fuel industry didn't fuck up the planet, quite frankly. And so that individualization is my way of kind of saying, actually, one of the solutions is to transition away from fossil fuels. And one of the solutions is to change the system, because I'm quite sick of people blaming everyday individuals. And I reference as well this term carbon footprint, which was coined by BP in a campaign. They wanted people to calculate their carbon footprint. Well, I go, well, what about yours? And it's endemic to the wider environmental discourse. I think we focus so much on consumption and consumer behaviour, which is very important. I will never ever say that individual action is mutually exclusive to system change. But when the rhetoric becomes so obsessed with individual action, you kind of have to stick your finger up and go, hang on a second. And alongside that, I really felt as though so many narratives about eco-anxiety were fixated on the physical manifestations of a dying planet without reflecting the social injustices that many environmental campaigners face, even though they are intrinsic to climate campaigning. A really classic example that I discuss in the book is one of my good friends, Laura Munoz, who I met in Colombia when I was living there. I actually met her after I sailed across the Atlantic to go to a climate conference, which was subsequently relocated to Madrid, so that was quite funny. There were many pictures in the newspapers mocking us. I found it hilarious. The rest of the team did not. But I met her in Colombia, and we met in a cafe, and she said, oh, this term eco-anxiety that you speak of, people are afraid of floods and natural disasters. I'm afraid of being killed by the police. Police brutality, that is a very big issue for black and brown campaigners who live in the global south, who live in this country as well. And is that not part of the climate conversation? It is, because fundamentally these are people who are taking action against the climate crisis. But as a result of neocolonial exploits in the global south, there is a vested interest in capital, which means these people are essentially collateral and they get in the way of that. And Colombia is the most dangerous place to be an environmental defender, where the majority of people who are murdered are indigenous to those lands. And so, that was another thing that I really wanted to stress when it came to the sort of individual narratives around eco-anxiety, is that there is a system in place and that it is killing people. But you don't see these perspectives reflected in the discourse when it comes to talking about mental health.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So look, we're getting to the big moment where we're going to announce it. So I'm going to ask these brilliant authors to take their seats again, but please give a big round of applause for Sophie Yo, Helen Chersky, Chantal Lyons, Oliver Franklin Wallace, and Toy Sue. And actually, this was the point where I was going to hand over to the chair of the judging panel for tonight to present the winners. That's Jocelyn Longdon. But unfortunately, I think it was just today, she learned that she got COVID. And so she can't be here tonight, which is really sad, because she was a brilliant chair of a group of judges that needed chairing, let's just put it that way. So she did a great job at that, and it's a real shame she's not here. I do have her words about the winner, which we'll get to in a moment, but I want to say that. So we, as the judges, we found to the right bit of it. As you can hear from the 5 books that we just talked about, and of course Fire Weather, that unfortunately we haven't got the author here tonight. A big range, big diversity of books in the shortlist this year, and we had it was a lot of discussion amongst the judges. And we have got a winner, I'm pleased to say, but we've also got a highly commended. And the highly commended goes to a book that I think was entertaining, that was challenging at times, that told a brilliant story about a species that isn't being told a story enough about. Highly commended goes to Groundbreakers, The Return of Britain's Wild Boar by Chantal Lyons. So congratulations, Chantal. Huge congratulations, Chantal. It's a beautiful book, and it had me laughing quite a lot through it as well as making me really think about things, which is utterly fantastic. So, and I really have recommended so many people read it. So, congratulations, Chantal. Wonderful. But then we do have a winner, and the winner for the Wainwright Prize Conservation Writing this year goes to a book that everyone agreed, all the judges agreed, is an astounding achievement. You know, a huge amount of work, huge amount of research in it. It tells the story kind of beautifully and brilliantly. It kind of made my head hurt at times with the amount of detail kind of in it. And actually just thinking about the process of writing it was must have been extraordinary. But it also really kind of offers something, a story about an environment that doesn't have enough written about it. The winner of the conservation category is Blue Machine by Helen Chersky. And Helen, congratulations. Congratulations. We have, it. Here is your amazing prize. If you'd like to spin it around, just show it. I think there'll be a few photos taken.
Can't hold both. I did not expect to be standing here at all. It's a huge honour, and I think that the story about if we all know we are citizens of an ocean planet, it changes our perspective on our everyday lives as well as who we think we are. And so it's wonderful that so many people, once you give them the idea, they totally get it and they run with it and they see the world differently. And I think I'm so grateful that you've appreciated that, and I'm grateful to all the many voices who, the ocean, is a collaborative place. We have to collaborate. It's complicated and difficult. The things in the book were discovered by many people, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So, Helen, let me read to you the words that Jocelyn would have said if she was here tonight. She said, in Blue Machine, we are immersed into the world of the ocean with spectacular detail, from the minuscule to the macroscopic, guided through the ocean's anatomy and introduced to the people who live in intimate relationships with it. It is overwhelming and astounding how little we know about our oceans, despite the immense role they play in sustaining life on this planet. With ocean temperatures reaching 400-year highs and mounting threats from deep-sea mining operations across the globe, understanding and taking action to protect ocean ecosystems has never been more urgent. Through compelling narratives, inspiring stories, and in-depth research, Helen Chersky transforms our view of the Blue Machine. Let's give Helen a big round of final £1 applause. And honestly, after judging this category for a few years, I can honestly tell you all the books this year were outstanding. So let's give it one more time to all the shortlisted authors.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ash Bardwaj. I'm a journalist and author, and I was also one of the judges for the Nature shortlist. And the Nature shortlist was fantastic. The thing that we really enjoyed as judges was the sense of personal narrative throughout each of the books on the shortlist, and how that elicited different thoughts about nature for us all. It made for a very interesting and robust discussion when it came to the judging process as well. But for the panel that I'm going to host, we're going to title it Lives Entwined with Nature. And the reason is because of that personal narrative and that personal insight that each of the authors gave to the books on the shortlist. So if I could please have up on the stage Rebecca Smith, the author of Rural, Kat Hill, the author of Bothy, Michael Millay, the author of Late Light, Marshall Farrell, the author of Uprooting, and Alistair Humphreys, the author of Local. Oh, sorry, we've not actually met.
No,
Lovely to
sorry,
meet you. Welcome to the stage, everybody, and congratulations to all of you for being shortlisted. It really was a joy to read the shortlist, and someone who tends to write about travel and read mostly about travel, to get these new insights into nature and open my eyes up to new ways of thinking about it was wonderful. And because each of you has put so much of your personal story into the books, it has, as I said earlier, brought out so many interesting questions. So I'd love to know about how your approach to writing the books through your own personal lens brought out new insights. So if you can tell us a bit about the book first, and then about why that personal story, how that drove what you chose to talk about. So Rebecca, we can start with you.
Well, my book is called Rural, and it's about tied housing. Really, that's where it all started with. Tied housing, if you didn't know, is about is when you have a job that comes with when you have a house that comes with a job. Now, a lot of rural areas have this, and I grew up in one. I didn't realise until I started researching the book, but entire generations of my family on both sides also lived like that. And it started me thinking just about how we are connected to the outside world, how we're connected to the land without owning anything at all. And that connection is really deep, and I didn't even know it was there until I wasn't really living in a place like that anymore. And I don't live in a rural area particularly now. I live in the suburbs. I don't live in a city though, but it's very much suburbia. And I miss it, and that's where it kind of came from. I wanted to explore that connection I had growing up completely surrounded by nature. Although I think one of the other authors said earlier, the illustrator, what is nature. And I kind of feel like that as well, because to me, it's just the outside. It's the outside world. But we were so, it just meant everything to us. And I didn't realize how important it was until afterwards. So anyway, it's about rural industries. A lot of my family worked in rural industries, whether it was coal mining, forestry, millwork, we're talking about generations past. And it's all about having that connection to the land and the house that comes with it, and what happens when you lose that.
Because we hear a lot about the working class of living in the cities and working in the mills and working in factories and so on, but I feel it's often neglected from our discussion of Britain's social history about the rural working class and the kind of lives people lived in the rural working class and the way that echoes through to today. But there's also this disconnect, which is something you talk about in the book, the loss of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when there was a real resurgence of working class voices in writing when I started thinking about writing anything. And every time I read something, I thought, well, that's not what I recognize. I wanted to read something that I recognized with being a working class person in the rural areas. And I just thought, well, I've read a little bit about this, but not much. And that's, I wanted to explore that more. And, that's where it came from. And there was obviously a huge resurgence in nature writing as well. And I wanted to write about the people who worked in nature and who lived, not just worked in nature, but who lived in a rural area. It's just so different when you drive that same route every day and you see when the leaves change and you see the snow on the mountains, and you get to know that kind of connection, that land so well that you just know it inside out. You know where the deer's going to jump out on the road. You know where to be careful not to, clip the tire or something like that. And it's just, that's just the surface kind of knowing the nature. I just wanted to explain that people who live and work in the countryside do understand about nature. We might all have different views of it,
and different ways of looking at things. But the people who understand it need a voice as well.
And it touches on some of the things we were mentioning earlier about what is nature, because our concept of nature within the UK now is actually predicated on a form of nature that's not that old as a product of the way we've used our land and so on. And by bringing in the stories of the people who live there and the voices of working class people rather than a sort of rarefied view of nature, you've brought in a really interesting insight.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I hope I did. I think it was Helen who said earlier, it's about it's changing slightly, the way people see things. And I just wanted a different perspective, a different perspective of nature. And like I said before, we might not all agree the way we do things, but, I think people who work in nature, they see it, they don't actually realize how much they understand it themselves. They just see it as a job. But actually, it is so ingrained into everything they do. And for the people who really love it, it's their world to them. And they know it really well. They just don't realize that.
It's almost a way of being rather than just knowledge.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Kat, your book is about, it's titled Bothy. And can you let people know what a bothy is, where most of them are, and how you came to write this book? Because you're not from the areas that the bothies are mostly in. So why did you write about them?
Yeah, sure. So yes, a bothy, for anyone who doesn't know, is a mountain refuge. Most are in Scotland. There are some in Wales. There are some in England. And they are free. They're unlocked. They're unbookable. They are places where you can go in these kind of beautiful, often quite remote places in the wild. You can turn up and you can dwell for the night. And so this kind of unique place in the ecosystem of kind of the hiking and the walking and the nature world. And as you said, I grew up in rural Shropshire, but I didn't grow up going to bothies. And the places that I visit in the book through a series of bothies, mostly in Scotland, but some south of the border as well, was really part of a journey for me of leaving a job I didn't like, coming out of a quite difficult personal circumstance, and finding, as the title of the book, Simple Shelter, finding these as a kind of form of shelter. But that question of my kind of personal narrative and what drove it, it's not a memoir. I don't occupy a huge amount of space in the book, and there are two really important reasons for that, which speak to, I think, the key of what I think it tells us about the relationship with nature. And the first is that it's never as simple as you go into nature and you're suddenly healed. Walking, being in nature, of course, it's really important for our physical and mental health. But to ask and to demand that nature will heal us suddenly is to ask too much of it. So the book is about mine and others' slow, repeated connection with places that you go to several times over. Not dissimilar to what Rebecca was saying about this connection with a place. And the second reason I didn't want to take up too much space in the book is because these are common shared spaces. I didn't want my story of that connection to place to be the only one, because what I tried to do with the book was to say how these places become a way of connecting with landscapes, with environments, with others. They're places of care, and people find their own form of shelter and refuge in many, many different ways, but all in this kind of connection with place and history and environment. And so I wanted to tell those stories. Mine was the vehicle for doing that, but it's not a book about me.
And as I read it, it made me realise a sort of supposition I have, because when you visit a bothy, you think, oh, this has always been there. But you talk about their history, where each of them comes from. And their history is actually surprisingly recent, particularly the sense of communal care for them.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that and how you explored it?
Exactly. A lot of these buildings are 19th century buildings. They were places of work, places of rural work. They were for estate workers, so they were for gillies, people working on the land. But their history in kind of the hiking community comes from the 1910s, 1920s, when people were starting to get out into the hills. So this kind of moment of particularly working class freedom, when people had a bit more time, leisure, and people reclaimed spaces that had been abandoned, either because of the clearances in Scotland or rural depopulation, as it became much harder to eke out lives on the land. So there's these layers of history, and the bothies themselves, the buildings, they're 19th century, but they speak to these places where there's been dwelling, there's been living. They're often on sites of summer sheelings, places where the cattle were taken for the summer months. So there's these layers of human use of entanglement. And that's one of the things I loved about them, is this kind of rediscovery of different ways in which human and non-human worlds live together and interact. And that's my training as a historian. And I think that's one of those things which really spoke to me.
And there's this interesting story through that, of the transformation of these places, of how they went from one use to another use to a different use today. And one of the ways to explore that is through the Bothy books, which are these sort of unintended historical records almost. And some amazing characters come through that.
Yeah, they're incredible. I mean, as a historian of, who loves archives, finding these books from the 1920s, one Bothy book from Carew, which is in the Cairngorms, and these characters on the page who are kind of writing, drawing, documenting their experiences. And I really loved it because it spoke to that idea of not everyone who goes to a Bothy is an environmentalist, certainly not in the 1920s, not now. But everyone has this really special connection to the place. You care for the Bothy because there's no one there to clean up after you. You're very conscious of the environment of the place. You don't burn live wood. You leave it as you find it. You leave no trace. And these historical records of people doing that, 70, 80 years ago and still doing it now. And there's a kind of constructed, timelessness. It's obviously not really timeless because people are living in these places, but this idea of kind of stepping away for the moment and seeing that and seeing figures doing that in the 1920s and 30s and still doing it now, it was a really lovely moment.
Sort of imbues a sense of care into the next generation to visit.
Yeah, exactly.
Congratulations. It's a lovely book, and it's made me want to go hiking around Scotland a lot more. Much to my wife's dismay. Michael, your book, the way you start with the book about your journey into discovering the places that you then write about and the creatures that you then write about has a familiarity to me with the sense of being a late arrival to falling in love with nature. And through that, you then go on this journey. Can you tell us a bit about the different subjects you write about in the book and how your personal physical journey and emotional journey drove that?
I think I'm a reluctant memoirist. I didn't plan to have any of myself or my own stories in this book, but that's kind of what happened. And it's what happened when I started listening to what the book, I think, was trying to tell me to do. I think I'm maybe naturally reticent. I don't want to disclose too much about my own life. But I found that when I was writing this book and thinking about, maybe it's worth explaining that the book began as an academic project. My original idea was I was interested in what it was like to be an ecologist or a conservationist in the midst of an ecological crisis. And my plan was to interview environmentalists and conservationists from around the country. And I wanted to meet them and to walk with them and to know what it was like to work at a time when the future seems to be closing. And you have to find a way of turning up to work and preserving, whatever landscape you're trying to protect or whatever species you're working on. And when I interviewed those people, I learned a tremendous amount about their lives, the texture of their lives, and the things that drove them, but also the fears and the doubts and the anxieties that they brought home at the end of the day. And I also had all those fears and anxieties and hopes, but I wasn't writing any of that into the book because I was writing in a very academic style where I was trying to be dispassionate and detached. And I was aware of that I was withholding something in myself. And it's only when I started to allow a personal voice to come through and to sort of move away from an academic style, suddenly all of these experiences I had as a migrant coming to England, all of these memories of walking with friends and learning the names of trees or listening to birdsong, all of that became relevant. And not only relevant, but deeply interesting. and part of the story that I was trying to tell with these conservationists that I was talking to. And so reluctantly, I just began to draw more of that personal elements into the story. And I never set out to write about eels in migration, for example, or eels migration and the Windrush generation. I never set out to write about moths in libraries or about mussels and gift giving. And when I sort of tell that, explain those connections to people, they look at me a bit, strangely, like how are moths and libraries connected? But they became connected precisely because I was letting my own story into the book. And we all, I think a lot of people in the room know about the incredible journeys that the European eel makes from the Sargasso Sea to Europe. I also made a kind of epic journey from Indonesia and Australia to England. I am an eel, in a way. Eel people will know exactly what I mean by that. If you're not an eel person, that would just sound strange. But I saw these resonances and these connections between the thing I was writing about and my own experiences. And I don't know, when I allowed myself to move away from an academic style, which I feel very comfortable with, precisely because I don't have to be vulnerable in an academic kind of voice. When I let my guard down, that vulnerability was also a kind of power, interestingly, because I was suddenly connected in a really tender way and heartfelt way to the things I was writing about. And I think for me, that's the gift of the animals to me, that they stretched my imagination and asked me to find a different voice that would be adequate to the kind of things that I was writing about.
And you don't talk about charismatic species. You talk about moths, mussels, eels, and you don't use them, but they are part of your way of exploring a bit about social history and the people that are engaging with them today. And I guess by allowing more of yourself into the story, it makes it easier to access those stories as well, rather than it just being about the species themselves.
Yes, and I think part of there's so many disadvantages with being someone who's a newcomer or an outsider to a country. But I think one of the advantages or the powers is that I just see things that maybe people who've been here a long time haven't seen before. I didn't come to England with the cultural baggage or the cultural sort of priorities that I think you unconsciously absorb when you grow up in a country. I didn't think the red squirrel was more interesting than the gray squirrel because I didn't have that cultural narrative drummed into me. And so I just was able to, the things I noticed were the things that I noticed. And I didn't feel like I was being pushed by a cultural narrative to prize or elevate certain creatures above others. And I realize this might sound sentimental or a bit naive, but I really do believe there's no such thing as a non-charismatic species. I think that's a fiction. And there's a wonderful line in a Hopkins journal where he says, the thing you look hard at looks hard at you. And that's true of anything you look at, I think. And it's just a case of our vision needing to be equal to the thing we're trying to see. Did I even answer your question?
You did, it was lovely. I'm just captivated by, it's making me rethink. And it was interesting touching on what you were talking about earlier, Rebecca, about like the presumed knowledge versus having a sort of outsider's perspective. Maybe the two of you should write a joint book next about the comparisons. Marshall, your book is about a garden, but it brings in some really fascinating and wide-ranging subjects that we don't normally encounter in nature writing. Partly through your own personal experience and heritage, but also through your previous work. So can you tell us about how a garden led you to these stories and these themes?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I do sometimes think about my garden as the co-author of this book, actually, because I really think that had we moved anywhere else, had I inhabited any other space, it would have been a different story that would have emerged. I may not have become a writer, but had I become a writer, it probably would have been a different story. The story is shaped very specifically by the specific plants and creatures that I kind of met in this place. And I suppose the way that my background kind of relates to me writing this story, I mean, like you, Michael, I'm a very reluctant memoirist. I'm a therapist. I'm used to listening to other people's stories. I'm used to being the one sitting and asking the questions and evoking the narrative from someone else and helping them piece it together. And when I started writing, it was really in the middle of COVID, when the world felt very mad. And things felt very insane, and I was writing as a way of trying to make sense of this really mad time that I felt we were all kind of collectively experiencing. And I thought that I would be writing a kind of psychotherapist's understanding of the madness that we were in and how we could maybe have a more sane view of ourselves and the world as we were kind of in relation with it. And my grandmother kept intruding into the story that I was telling, and I sort of realized that I wouldn't get anywhere unless I listened to her and listened to the story that she was inviting me to tell. And when I finally let go of feeling kind of shy about putting myself on the page, I sort of realized that I hadn't ever seen anyone like me on a page. On a nature writing shelf. I hadn't ever seen a Black Caribbean perspective before. And so it suddenly felt important to kind of try and bring that to the world. You know, the world is shaped by the stories that we tell. And so the more and different and interesting stories that we can have, the more we can build a kind of different world. But the garden, it's a very particular place. It's really, we've never had a garden before. We had never had our own outdoor space that we owned. It's a terrible garden for amateurs. It's difficult. It's steep. There's no flat space. There's no lawn. So, you can't like have a nice lawn with some neat borders around the edge. The whole thing is terraced. So it's all borders, essentially, as you go up and down through the space. It's shady. It can be damp in winter. It gets drought in summer. I don't know. I mean, if I had known anything about gardening, I probably wouldn't have chosen this garden, but I didn't. I was ignorant, and so enthusiastically threw ourselves into it. And because I moved into there in COVID times, I couldn't form a relationship with people. We were kind of trapped in this place, and I found myself coming into a really kind of profound relationship with this place, and realized that actually I already knew that relationship with place was really important, that actually we had lots of evidence from my kind of psychiatric background about how terrifically important relationship with place is. A really key one that is very kind of close to me is about the risk of schizophrenia for Black British people of Caribbean heritage. And, for someone like me who's directly migrated from the Caribbean, the risk is the same as the English person, pretty much the same as people who still live in the Caribbean. But for my children's generation, the risk is 9 times higher than that of a white British person. And that's not the same in the Caribbean. The risk remains equally low for Black Caribbean children in the Caribbean. And it's not genetic, they've sort of, when they look at it, they've actually realized that it's environmental. So it's actually about relationship with place. So our relationship with place is profoundly important, and that's what I really wanted to explore, actually. That's what kind of led me into writing this book.
And through your own story of migration and looking back at the history of slavery and so on, you explore some really interesting concepts around belonging in relation to plants and make some unexpected discoveries along the way. And there's a story about a rose, and is it bougainvillea? Is the plant that you presumed was native to Trinidad, but it wasn't?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a whole host of them. That was this gutting moment. There's a beautiful writer who I'm sure everyone in this room will know, Jamaica Kincaid. And she has written many books, but one of them is called My Garden Book, which is this book about her own garden. And actually, she's the only other person that I've encountered who's written as an Afro-Caribbean person about gardening. For her, it's in Vermont, it's in America. And someone had recommended her book to me when I was feeling really homesick in COVID. I was, remembering home. I was remembering my gardens of home. I was stuck in this English garden that I didn't really know what to do with, and that was sort of looking quite bare and feeling all distressed. And they kind of said, well, why don't you read, she's a gardener, read Jamaica Kincaid. And I was chuckling along reading her narratives of a person from the Caribbean wrestling with temperate gardening. And then she really punched me in the gut. There's this chapter where she talks about what Joseph Banks wrote. And she writes about the plants of the Caribbean gardens, so all the ones that I was feeling really homesick for at that point in time, and how none of them are native to the Caribbean. Every single one of them was brought in by colonial trade. And I realized that this landscape that I was missing was essentially a colonial lie that I'd been sold, and that actually I didn't know my home, the place that I had viewed as my home. I didn't actually know what it would have really originally looked like. But then I looked at my own garden and realized that actually it was the same here, that actually this garden, this English garden, this English country cottage garden that I was kind of attempting to learn to tend, none of those plants were native to England. And actually all the plants that are native to England are the weeds that I was being quite forcefully told that I should eradicate or control or manage, that they would take over this space. And so I found that really interesting. I thought, well, what does that say about Englishness? What does that say about how native English people view themselves? Actually, you can't tolerate having native English plants to surround you. I thought that said something very profound about the way we see ourselves and our relationship with this place that we're in. But I found comfort in the rose. My grandmother loved roses, and she used to try to grow them in the Caribbean, where they looked terrible. They looked sickly, they looked pathetic and sad and yellowy leaves, and I was just like, why did she, they pride of place in her front garden. She was very house proud, garden proud, these rose bushes. And I was like, why, Grandma? They look dreadful. Like, we have all these other nice plants. No. And then I moved to England and I met a rose, and I mean, they're stunning. And I understood what she had fallen in love with. And I found a rose in my garden, which reminded me of her. But then I realized that actually the rose was a plant that had arrived here, not native. Most of them, there are some native English roses, but the ones that we cultivate in our gardens, not so much. But it has been embraced. I mean, it forms such a part of the English identity, the rose, War of the Roses, the Tudor rose, all this sort of thing. So that gave me comfort as an immigrant to this country.
And it's the point you're making about things that become accepted. It's been covered in writing through food quite a few times, chicken tikka masala and so on. But you've done it in an incredible way through the story of your garden. So thank you so much. Alistair.
Hello. Can I just offer my congratulations on your commitment to the judging panel by coming dressed as the Wainwright Prize branding. That is magnificent.
Thank you. Living the brand. You're best known up until this point for books about adventures, going off and doing difficult things, sometimes in far-flung places. But for this book, you completely changed your approach to adventure and entered into the world of nature writing by looking very differently at the world close to your home. How did that personal journey, internal journey, change the way you viewed the places near your home? And can you give everyone a bit of an idea of what the book actually is about?
Okay, thank you. So I started by writing books about really big adventures and sort of encouraging people to go do some big adventures. And then I gradually got smaller, encouraging people towards smaller micro adventures, I call them. Get out and explore the country, head up, find some bothies, that sort of thing. But whilst a big adventures may be a trip of a lifetime for someone, and a trip to Scotland for bothies, a sort of project for your summer holiday or something. I was wondering if there was a way to try and get people to live a bit more adventurously everywhere, every day, and to try and look for nearby nature and wildness. So I decided to spend a whole year just exploring the single Ordnance Survey map that I live on. And my thinking is that all of us live on an Ordnance Survey map. So then suddenly it hopefully became a bit more accessible for everyone to get out and try and find some adventures. What I found in writing this, though, was that when I started the book, I was probably trying to write a book that used the outdoors and nature and wild places in order to help people have adventures. But by the end, it was more about using the adventure of exploring to help people find the nature and the wildness, and to realize that the more you look, the more you see, the more you pay attention, the more there is. And on a personal level, this was quite a useful project for me, because I spend probably too much of my time dreaming of distant oceans and deserts and mountains, and the realities of life means that actually I just live in a fairly boring suburbia. And so it would make sense for me to try and to learn to love where I live, and to do so by really immersing myself in it, paying attention and seeing what wildness and nature I could find.
And did you learn to love where you live?
Well, it's a journey, but I certainly learned to appreciate it, and I certainly realised that there's so much more nature on my doorstep than I'd never known before. And I've spent years and years writing and doing all sorts of stuff about adventuring around where I lived, but now suddenly, by forcing myself to be restricted to just 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers for a whole year, it made me realize that this area I knew so well, actually I didn't know it at all. And I was worried at the start of the year that a whole year on one map would be quite claustrophobic and boring. By the end of the year, I thought, crikey, I've not even scratched the surface of this map. With enough observation and curiosity, there's perhaps a lifetime of exploration on anyone's map.
And has that changed the way you notice nature? So where we are today isn't on your Ordnance Survey map, but have you found that because you've forced yourself to notice things for those 12 months, that whenever you go other places, you do notice more things?
Yeah, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it's completely transformed the way that I look at the world. So before I started to write this book, all of my writing direction and ambition was towards sort of travel and adventure writing, and it was only as I started to write this that I realized actually I was writing a nature book, and for the first time in my life suddenly becoming aware and caring on a much deeper level than I'd ever done before. When you watch a David Attenborough program and you see the polar bears dying and you feel quite sad, and then you do nothing about it. So now to see the local wood where I live being chopped down, or any tiny little things, it made me connect and care with the landscape and with the access to the landscape more than I'd ever done before. And that then, once you start to notice things, you can't unsee them, and so that applies wherever you go.
Rebecca, just come back to you. Do you notice things when you return to the places in the book, having spent so much time away from them? Do you think you notice it more, or the things that notice the wildlife and the nature and so on in a way that you just took it for granted before?
Yes, in some ways. In the way that when you're younger, you don't realise what you've got on your doorstep. Growing up in somewhere like the Lake District, where Wainwright obviously grew up, this is literally the picture. This is in about 4 miles south of Hawkshead, so he would have known that area quite well. And yeah, you don't realise how incredible it is. You just take it for granted. And one of my brother's wedding, we were in Hawkshead, and my friend had said, he's been traveling, I think he said to the Himalayas, I can't remember. And he says, and look, I didn't need to. Look, it's incredible what we've got here on our doorstep. And I kind of ended the book with that a little bit, because you just, when you're younger, you notice it. You're connected to nature, but you don't notice you are. You just get on with it, And I think that's what young children have, and it's so special. And you are always outside in it, and it's great. And yeah, it's different when you go back, because you realise this is part of us all.
Well, guys, thank you very much for talking through that. I only got through one of the 4 questions I was supposed to get through because it was such a good chat. But unfortunately, we now have to get on with giving the prize away. So can I ask you to all take your seats again? And a round of applause for our lovely authors. In a minute, I'm going to ask Jane King to come up to actually hand out the prize this evening. But I'll give you a bit of an insight into what the judging process was like. As you can hear from the discussion, there was a lot, and it was really stimulating when we actually had our judging conversation to hear all these different perspectives from different people within the judging panel who'd all noticed something different. And in doing so, the books came alive a second time. So it was a really wonderful process to go through. There's a couple of the books that aren't represented here tonight by their authors. So Jessica L. Lee's Dispersals is a wonderful book that is a collection of essays that each approaches a plant and how that plant affected her life, and uses that as a way to explore different themes and topics. It's a really magical book. You should definitely check that one out. And The Garden Against Time by Olivia Land, which uses, through her journey of redeveloping a garden that she ends up looking after, that she uses that as a stepping off point to explore how gardens have been used throughout history, throughout time, all the way back to the mythology of the Garden of Eden, and how gardens are connected to sociology in our worlds today. So those two aren't here, I'm afraid. But can I ask Jane to come up for the prize giving? Sorry, that's a round of applause. So, as I said, it was quite a robust discussion on the judging, and the different themes that we explored through were not just the writing or how readable the book was, but its accessibility, and also how it gave us a sense of wonder or motivated or inspired us to do things. And the highly commended book for nature writing was one that was absolutely magical and made me feel like I saw the world in a different way. And each chapter just made me feel a different emotion and a different vibe and a different theme. And the highly commended book for nature writing is Dispersals on Plants, Borders and Belonging by Jessica J. Lee, who's not here this evening. But the winner for the Wainwright Nature Writing Prize was one that the accessibility of it was remarkable. It explored some really difficult topics through the stories of people, and it helped all of us on the judging panel understand things in a new way. It talks about loss, but what we all thought was remarkable and clever about it was it wasn't just about the loss of parts of nature, but what those losses would do for us, for society, for our history, as these things disappeared. And the winner for the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing is Late Light, The Secret Wonders of a Disappearing World by Michael Millay. Do you want to say anything, Jane? Sorry. Was that...
Here you are. You well deserved. And I really enjoyed your book too.
Michael, do you want me to take the prize for you? And then...
Sorry, Ash, that we gave you so many sleepless nights and robust discussions. Yeah, this is very unexpected. I'm incredibly honored to be the recipient of this award. Being on the shortlist with so many gifted authors was already a kind of dream for me. So to go one step further is really beyond anything I could have reasonably expected of the book. I'm still with a lot of the conversations that we've heard from the different panels. And I know that there are things that have been said tonight by lots of people that I know I'll be thinking about in the weeks to come. But just what's sitting with me now is something that the writer Amitav Ghosh says in The Great Derangement, which is that the ecological crisis and the climate crisis is also partly a crisis of the imagination. And what I think he means by that is we don't yet have the kinds of storytellers and the stories that might be equal to the particular pressures and demands that the climate crisis is making on us, on our imaginations, on our politics, on our culture. I haven't read all the books on the shortlist, but I have read most of them. And what I can say is that all of the books I read have stretched and opened, but also nourished and also healed my imagination in some way. And I feel in our culture we are surrounded by so much impoverishment in terms of the imagination. I feel it in my body when I see the latest, I don't know, advertisement for a Land Rover or an advertisement for a Hollywood film that I don't want to watch. And I wonder what kind of world are these people living in, that we are continuing to consume and to eat up things rather than to give and to accept the gifts that we're surrounded by. And yeah, I just wanted to say that because there's no crisis of the imagination with the shortlisted authors and indeed the long-listed authors from all the different categories tonight. And I'm exceptionally proud to share space with gifted storytellers who are trying to open up the form, who are trying to connect the personal and the political, and trying to find ways of being equal to the hard times that are here already. One last thing, I was thinking of what Jackie was saying earlier about fantasy being real. And that put me in mind of Ursula Le Guin, who talks about the need for poets and visionaries who can be realists of a larger reality. Realists of a larger reality. Fantasy is part of that. The imagination is part of that. And we're blacksmithing away in this forge of the imagination, and we're trying to make it bigger and more generous and more alive. And I'm rabbiting on now, you can tell. I might just, I'll just give that mic back to Jane and Ash. And thank you so much.
Oh, that was interesting.
Very well. Congratulations, well done. Really loved it. Well, all of the assigned tasks for the evening have been completed, the prizes have been given out, the conversations have been had. So with that, I think we can all head outside.
I think so. Can I just say a quick thank you to all of our wonderful, esteemed judging chairs and people tonight, into Ash, Craig, Dan and Roisin. It was brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we've had, wow is the answer. I feel actually. It's like 3 of the most interesting podcasts I've ever listened to. And it's really motivating and inspiring to hear all of you authors talk in the way you have tonight. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much for all those authors and for all of us for joining us. And there are some drinks outside. If you can brave it outside, come back in here for a bit if you want to. But please do meet and talk to everybody here. It's been a great night. Thank you very, very much.